Three.
Hello.
Good afternoon, Zoe.
Okay, that was quite something. Let's start with the headline out of the debate from each of you. Zach, what's the lead?
I think that all three candidates can credibly come away declaring victory. Each one of them kind of came in with a certain set of goals and comes away having done exactly what they wanted to. So I don't know how much actually changed, but I think it's a clear delineation of where each of their candidacy stands and what their strategies are.
Agreed with that. I would say these are three strong candidates who are defining their lanes and defining themselves to Michigan voters. And I think this is the first and biggest stage that they've kind of gotten to do that on the most publicly altogether.
So I would say to both of you and Zoe, Mallory McMorrow may have been the redhead on the stage, but it was Haley Stevens who was channeling Debbie Stabenow through that whole debate. I was sitting there, I was trying to keep track, but I lost count eventually how many times Haley said Michigan versus how many times Abdul said billionaires. That seemed to me be a theme out of those two, right? So I thought that was the most interesting part that I saw.
Yeah, Brad Williams, let's talk about the politics. Why mention Debbie Stabenow?
Well, I mean, she is supporting Congresswoman Stevens. I think there's no question. She's a legend in Michigan politics. People still take her opinion seriously. And so using her verbiage, her issues, that's brilliant here.
But it talks about the sort of lane that Haley Stevens is trying to coordinate here in her campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, when we talk to our clients, they want someone who can actually accomplish things in the United States Senate, whether that's someone like Congresswoman Stevens, who actually has congressional victories to point to, or Senator McMorrow, who I thought was incredibly detailed in her answers given the short period of time, pointed to a true bipartisan accomplishment, including work with Senator John DeMoose. So I think that's why those two came out of this with the most clear advantage.
Mallory McMorrow, what is her lane, Emily?
You know, it's kind of hard because Abdul Sayed has this sort of progressive lane. We mentioned the number of billionaire mentions that were thrown out during this debate. Haley Stevens is obviously trying to run the congressional sort of lane where she has this experience and knows what she's doing. So Mallory McMorrow is stuck trying to translate her state legislative experience into a U.S. Senate race, which I think she made a good run at today. And I think that, she tried to counter maybe the Stabenow vibes by pointing out that she's been endorsed by other U.S. senators and talk about some of the policy that she has been able to accomplish in the state Senate. I do think that's inherently a little bit of a hard message to get out to Michigan voters, just because, there's a lot more engagement in federal than local politics.
Yeah. Zack Stanton, you didn't have to watch too much to understand the lane that Abdul Sayed is trying to take here.
Absolutely. It came out, throwing elbows, certainly, taking shots at the Mackinac conference itself and its attendees. But that's in keeping with what his goal was here, which is to set the tone of the debate, set the frame of the debate, and return time and again to issues like money in politics, like Medicare for all, like Gaza, things that he knows are popular with the progressive base and where he's aiming to fire up supporters. And, he's making inroads. That strategy has worked. It's got him to a certain point. The question is, how much further does he have to go until he hits a ceiling? And, there are only 68 days or so left until the primary ends. And it remains to be seen, what his ceiling is, how much further he can go. Right now, he's kind of at the same level of support he had in the 2018 primary. So it could be that the primary electorate looks different now than it did in 2018. It probably does. But no one exactly knows what exactly that primary electorate looks like at this point. But Abdul's doing what he set out to do, for sure.
And I think if someone like Abdul is going to win, he has to find something else to say besides billionaires. I mean, if you listen to the questions, economy, the billionaires. Healthcare, billionaires. Israel, billionaires. Not every problem can be solved by taxing billionaires. In fact, Zoe, he said he wanted to tax wealth at 7%. That's 7 times what Elizabeth Warren wanted. I mean, this is getting a little nutty.
We saw Abdul Sayed really gin up a crowd and a lot of support at the Michigan Democratic Convention this year. We've seen him certainly try to tap into those younger audiences with university visits and things like that. To Zach's point, it kind of depends on what the electorate looks like. And if the electorate looks more young and more progressive than we're used to in this state, certainly his lane could be viable.
Zach, will this debate have changed any minds?
I don't know. I mean, there's this idea sometimes that you can approach a debate as how to win over people. Another way to think of it is try and get people to think that they agreed with you all along. And I think it depends who the audience is. The people in this room certainly were not Abdul's intended audience. You know,
No, but don't you think he got the most applause?
That's interesting. You know, certainly early on, I was wondering about that. There was a lot of talk in our media holding pen, basically, about, you know, whether the room was stacked in his favor,
Right.
but everyone seemed to get a fair amount of applause. Like
Okay.
it didn't seem too one-sided one way or the other. But you know, I don't know how much actually changed today, but what it did is, I think, again, just clearly defined what their different strategies are. And Mallory, as you say, trying to be a sort of consensus candidate between Haley's establishment, more Debbie Stabenow type mode, Abdul's sort of Bernie-esque model, and Mallory's betting that there's an opening in the middle, somewhere between, where she can bridge the gap between those two. But who knows how that plays out.
I think to the point of who this debate helped, in my previous life, I worked here at the chamber for 17 years. I planned these things, I listened to them, I had my opinions. The one thing that's important to remember is the audience in that room is not the audience they're trying to reach, which is why you heard
Totally
Abdul
fair.
talk about billionaires over and over again, though I don't know if there's any billionaires in that room or not. There seems to be very few of them. But that wasn't for that room. That was for the people who are watching back home. And that's been consistent as the Chamber's held these debates over the last 20 years or so.
Emily, anything surprise you?
You know, I think one audience applause line surprised me. We talked about how all the candidates got a little bit of a love from the audience at various points, but Mallory McMurrow talked a little bit about getting rid of SOAR and changing the state's economic development structure, and for that to get an applause line in this room was kind of surprising to me.
Interesting. Zack, Stanton, what are you going to be watching for now? I mean, you know, we've sort of had this first televised debate. Where do the candidates go from here?
Well, I mean, literally, Mallory McMorrow has an event in Elk Rapids tonight. But
A brewery, right?
Yes.
She's going to need a beer
Yeah.
after this.
Metaphorically, you know, I think all of us would benefit
Everybody
from that.
deserves one.
You know, I think it remains to be seen whether anything really shakes up this race.
Yeah.
And each candidate has like a big bet that they've made. You know, Abdul's bet is that he can carry the progressive energy and momentum on to victory in August. You know, one big question there is whether, say, the college student vote shows up in August when campus isn't in session. Mallory remains to be seen if the middle lane is actually still open, or whether Haley and Abdul have sort of solidified enough support behind their candidacies to shut that off. And Haley, I think it remains to be seen whether the sort of anger at the establishment and at incumbents proves too big a hurdle, such that, you know, her strategy, her approach, that I think is very indicative of almost an earlier era of politics, where, you know, if this election were being held in 1998 or so, I think there's no question Haley Stevens would be walking away with this. She has a much more traditional path to the Senate, but politics has really changed. And that is, I think, the big variable that I'm watching here is how much is this showing where politics is headed in 2026, but also in 2028.
And generationally, right? I mean,
Yeah.
look at this stage. It's 3 millennials.
Three millennials, yeah.
There's no Chuck Schumers up there, that's for sure.
No.
The one thing I was thinking about when you asked where they go from here, you know, I've heard from people up here this week and my clients that the recent round of advertising that the independent committee supporting Haley has really kind of changed the game for her. Not necessarily with primary voters, but with general election voters. So to me, it's going to be interesting to see. Certainly, Mallory and Abdul have financial resources to go on TV. It's interesting to me to see when they go on TV, or maybe that's not their angle. Maybe they're trying to use more grassroots social media. But I think there's got to be a huge temptation for both of them to pull the trigger on ads sooner rather than later.
Still so much to watch for. We got to end it there. So sorry. That is Emily Lawler, Brad Williams, Zack Stanton. Thank you so much for the insights on this debate.
Thanks for having us.
I
Thank you,
appreciate
Zoe.
you guys.